1878. A saloon in Fort Griffin, Texas. A massive, hairless man dances in the center of the room, 7 feet tall, perfectly bald, no eyebrows, no body hair. Skin pale as an infant's. He's playing fiddle. The music is beautiful, complex. His massive fingers move with impossible grace across the strings, and he's dancing, moving to his own music, his enormous body flowing like water, like something that defies physics. The crowd loves him. They cheer, they clap along, they buy him drinks. They want to touch him, want to be near him, want to be part of whatever this is. Outside, behind the building, men have discovered something in the outhouse, a small wooden structure behind the saloon. They open the door. Now they're screaming. Some are on their knees vomiting. Others are weeping openly. Grown men crying like children. One man runs into the street shouting for the sheriff. Another just stands frozen, staring at nothing, his mind trying to process what his eyes have seen. They've never witnessed anything like it, never imagined such a thing was possible, never conceived that one human could do this to another. But inside the saloon, the music continues. The dancer doesn't stop, doesn't pause, doesn't even glance toward the commotion outside. He never stops. His feet move in perfect rhythm. His smile never fades. His pale eyes reflect the lamplight like mirrors. He never sleeps, the judge. He is dancing, dancing. He says that he will never die. This is Judge Holden, and this is the final image of Blood Meridian, the most terrifying book ever written. But to understand how we arrived at this moment, we must go back 33 years, back to when this journey began, back to when the kid first met the judge. Actually, we need to go back even further, to a different place, a different kind of violence. 1985, New York City, Random House Publishing, a completely different world from that Texas saloon. An editor sat alone in his office on a cold October morning. The city was waking up outside his window. Traffic sounds, people rushing to work, normal life. Inside, he held a manuscript that would change everything he thought he knew about American literature, about violence, about human nature. 337 pages, typed, double-spaced, but feeling heavier than any manuscript he'd ever held. No quotation marks anywhere in the text, no apostrophes and contractions, no comfort for the reader, no conventional structure. He had been reading since dawn, started at 5 in the morning, couldn't sleep, had to know how it ended. Now it was past 9. His coffee sat cold and forgotten on the desk. His secretary had knocked twice to check on him. He'd waved her away both times. His hands trembled slightly as he turned each page. Not from cold, not from caffeine, from what he was reading. This wasn't like other manuscripts. This wasn't a Western. This wasn't a historical novel. This wasn't even really a story in the conventional sense. This was something else entirely, something darker, something that felt less like fiction and more like prophecy, like scripture, like revelation. Page after page described violence in the American Southwest, the frontier, the borderlands, the territories where America was supposedly bringing civilization. But there was no civilization in these pages, no heroism, no manifest destiny, no romantic vision of the Old West. Just violence, systematic, documented, historical, real, not sanitized, not romanticized, not softened for modern sensibilities, not made palatable for book clubs and literary reviews. Historical brutality rendered in biblical language, clinical precision wrapped in Old Testament cadence, the voice of an angry prophet describing the fall of kingdoms. The editor closed the manuscript, sat back in his chair, stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he reached for his phone, called his colleague in the next building. His voice was shaking slightly as he spoke. "You need to read this," he said. "But I'm warning you now, this is unpublishable. No mainstream audience will accept this. This goes too far. This is too honest, too brutal, too real." He paused, listened to his colleague's response, then continued. "I don't know what to do with it. I don't know if we can print this. But I also know this is one of the most important things I've ever read." The manuscript was Blood Meridian. The title came from the violence it described, from the blood that soaked the desert, from the Meridian, the high point of American brutality. The author was Cormac McCarthy, a 52-year-old novelist who lived in near poverty in El Paso, Texas, a man who drove a decades-old car, who lived in a small house near the Mexican border, who sometimes didn't have money for food. His previous 5 novels had sold poorly. Combined, they'd sold maybe 10,000 copies. Publishers had stopped returning his calls. Agents had dropped him. The literary world had forgotten he existed. A man who had disappeared from public view for 7 years. 7 years of complete silence. No interviews, no readings, no book tours, nothing. 7 years of obsessive research into a period of American history most people prefer to forget. McCarthy had spent those years traveling, thousands of miles across the American Southwest, from Texas to Chihuahua to Arizona to California, following the actual routes of the Glanton gang. The Glanton gang was real, not fiction, not legend, real, documented in historical records, in newspaper accounts, in military reports, in Mexican archives. They operated along the Texas-Mexico border in 1849 and 1850, scalp hunters, mercenaries, hired by the Mexican government to kill Apache raiders. But they didn't just kill Apache raiders. They killed anyone, everyone. Whoever's remains could pass for Apache and earn payment. McCarthy read everything about them, every historical document, every survivor account, every military record, every newspaper story. He learned Spanish so he could read Mexican archives in their original language, so he could understand what the Mexican sources said, the perspectives that American historians ignored. He studied Gnostic theology, ancient Christian texts that most people have never heard of, texts about evil gods and fallen worlds and the darkness at the heart of creation. He read Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, philosophers who questioned whether life has meaning, whether morality is real, whether existence is worth the suffering it contains. He traveled the actual routes, walked the deserts, stood in the places where the violence occurred, felt the sun, felt the landscape, understood the geography of hell. For 7 years, McCarthy lived with this research, lived with this violence, lived with these questions. And then he wrote Blood Meridian, 337 pages that would redefine what American literature could be, could say, could force readers to confront. What that editor didn't know, what he couldn't have known on that October morning, was that he held one of the most important American novels ever written. Within a decade, Blood Meridian would be called a masterpiece. Critics would compare McCarthy to Melville, to Faulkner, to Homer, to the greatest writers in human history. Harold Bloom, one of America's most respected literary critics, would declare it one of the 4 essential American novels, would say that anyone who wants to understand American literature must read Blood Meridian. Universities would teach entire courses analyzing its 337 pages. Professors would spend entire semesters unpacking its philosophy, its symbolism, its vision of human nature. And readers worldwide would finish the final page, close the book, and sit in stunned silence, unable to speak, unable to process, unable to return immediately to normal life. Because Blood Meridian doesn't just describe historical violence, it doesn't just tell a story about bad men doing bad things. It confronts you with a vision of human nature so dark, so uncompromising, so stripped of comfortable illusions that it forces you to ask questions you've spent your entire life avoiding. Questions about morality, about the nature of evil, about whether civilization is real or just a thin pretense, about whether humanity is worth saving at all. Questions about American history, about what we actually did, about what expansion actually meant, about the violence we prefer to forget. Questions about violence itself, about whether it's aberrant or fundamental, about whether war is a failure or the natural state, about whether the judge is wrong or terrifyingly right. My name is your name, and this is the story of the most terrifying book ever written. For the next hour, I'm going to take you through Blood Meridian, through its plot, through its style, through its philosophy. I'm going to introduce you to the judge, and once you meet him, you'll never forget him. I'm going to show you why this book matters, why it terrifies, why you need to read it, even though it will disturb you. Because some books entertain, some books educate, some books comfort. Blood Meridian does none of these things. It challenges, it confronts, it forces you to look at realities you'd rather ignore. And once you've looked, you cannot unsee what you've witnessed. Let's begin. To understand Blood Meridian, you must first understand Cormac McCarthy. Born Charles McCarthy in 1933 in Providence, Rhode Island, the third of 6 children. His father was a lawyer for the Tennessee Valley Authority. The family moved to Knoxville, Tennessee when McCarthy was 4 years old. He would later say that he never felt he belonged in Providence, that Tennessee was his true home, that the South shaped everything he would write. He was not a good student. He was intelligent, perhaps brilliant, but uninterested in formal education. He read voraciously on his own, fiction, philosophy, history. But he had no patience for classroom structure. He attended the University of Tennessee in 1951, lasted 1 year, dropped out, joined the Air Force for 4 years, returned to the university in 1957, dropped out again in 1959 without graduating. But while at the university, something crucial happened. He took a creative writing course, and he discovered that writing was what he wanted to do, not as a hobby, not as a side project, as his life's work. He published his first novel, The Orchard Keeper, in 1965. He was 32 years old. The novel won the William Faulkner Foundation Award for a debut novel. Critics praised it, called McCarthy a significant new talent, said he had a unique voice that combined Faulkner's Southern Gothic with something darker and more primal. It sold 800 copies. His second novel, Outer Dark, came out in 1968, even darker than the first, more disturbing. Critics again praised it. It sold fewer copies than the first. His third novel, Child of God, published in 1973, told the story of a murderer and outcast in Appalachia. The content was so disturbing that some bookstores refused to stock it. His fourth novel, Suttree, took him 11 years to write. It was published in 1979. By this point, McCarthy had published 4 novels over 14 years, all critically praised, all commercial failures. He lived in poverty, real poverty. He lived in a dairy barn in Tennessee that he'd converted into a residence. No heat, no running water for periods. He survived on canned food and the occasional grant from foundations that recognized his talent, even if the public didn't. His first marriage ended. Then his second marriage ended. Friends from his university days lost contact with him. He became reclusive, obsessive about his writing, indifferent to everything else. By 1979, all his novels were out of print. Publishers were reluctant to take his work. It was too dark, too difficult, too uncommercial. But in 1974, something changed. McCarthy moved to El Paso, Texas. He bought a small house near the Mexican border with money from a MacArthur Fellowship grant. And he began researching a book that would consume the next 7 years of his life. He became obsessed with a historical figure named John Joel Glanton, a real person, a scalp hunter who operated along the Texas-Mexico border in 1849 and 1850. Glanton led a gang of about 40 men, Americans, Mexicans, former soldiers, criminals, psychopaths. They were contracted by Mexican authorities to hunt Apache raiders. They were paid per scalp. But the Glanton gang quickly realized they could target anyone. As long as the scalp looked like it might be Apache, they got paid. So they did. They targeted peaceful settlements, the elderly, women, anyone defenseless. The historical records of the Glanton gang are fragmentary, but what exists is horrifying. One account describes them entering a peaceful village and systematically taking the lives of everyone present over the course of several hours. McCarthy read these accounts, and he became convinced that the Glanton gang represented something essential about American expansion, something that the frontier myth had hidden, something that needed to be confronted. He read 19th century newspapers from border towns, yellowed pages in local historical societies. He combed through military records, reports from Army officers stationed along the border, reports that were filed and forgotten. He traveled the actual routes the gang would have taken, from Texas to Chihuahua to Arizona to California, thousands of miles. He went on foot where possible, by car when necessary, taking notes, photographing landscapes, learning how the terrain felt, how the desert looked at different times of day. He learned Spanish, not tourist Spanish, serious, academic Spanish, so he could read Mexican historical documents in their original language, so he could understand both sides of these conflicts without depending on translations. He studied Gnostic theology, ancient Christian heresies from the 2nd and 3rd centuries, complex ideas about the nature of evil, about the material world being created by a malevolent or incompetent deity, about divine sparks trapped in corrupt flesh. Why Gnosticism? Because McCarthy believed these ancient ideas explained something about human nature and violence that modern philosophy missed. He read Nietzsche, particularly the genealogy of morals and beyond good and evil. He studied Nietzsche's ideas about power, about master and slave morality, about the will to dominate. He read Schopenhauer, particularly The World as Will and Representation. He absorbed Schopenhauer's pessimism about human nature and the nature of existence. For 7 years, McCarthy essentially disappeared into this research. Friends from El Paso would later say they rarely saw him. He'd go weeks without leaving his house except to buy supplies, canned food, coffee, cigarettes, nothing else. He'd work through the night, sleep during the day. His schedule was chaotic, his focus absolute. His marriage to his second wife ended during this period. She left. He barely noticed. He was too consumed by the book, and in 1985, he finished. 337 pages, 25 sections, no quotation marks, no chapter numbers, no comfort for the reader, no moral guideposts, no easy interpretations. Random House published it with minimal promotion. They weren't sure what they had. The content was too extreme for mainstream marketing. They printed 2,500 copies, a small run. They expected it to disappear quietly. The first reviews were mixed at best. Some called it unreadable, too difficult, too dense. The prose was compared to a wall that readers had to climb rather than a path they could walk. Some called it disgusting, too violent, gratuitously brutal, violence for violence's sake. Some called it nihilistic, devoid of meaning, a book that celebrated evil rather than confronting it. But some critics saw something else entirely. They saw what McCarthy had created, a novel that didn't just tell a story about frontier violence, but revealed the philosophical and psychological foundations of human conflict itself. A book that asked fundamental questions. What if evil isn't an aberration? What if violence isn't a breakdown of civilization, but rather what civilization is built upon? A book that forced readers to confront uncomfortable truths about American history, about human nature, about the thin line between order and chaos. Gradually, over years, Blood Meridian's reputation grew. Literary critics began writing essays about it. Scholars began teaching it in universities. Readers who had dismissed it on first encounter came back to it and found depths they'd missed. Today, more than 40 years after its publication, Blood Meridian appears on virtually every list of the greatest American novels ever written. It has sold millions of copies, been translated into dozens of languages, been analyzed in hundreds of scholarly articles and books, and still, to this day, no filmmaker has successfully adapted it. Directors have tried. Studios have bought the rights multiple times. Scripts have been written by acclaimed screenwriters, but the violence is too extreme, the philosophy too dark, the main antagonist, Judge Holden, too disturbing to portray on screen, and perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps some literature is meant to exist only as literature, as words on a page that the reader must confront alone. So let us begin where McCarthy began, with a character born into violence, with a journey into darkness, with questions that have no comfortable answers. See the child. These are the first 3 words of Blood Meridian, and they introduce us to our protagonist. A boy born in Tennessee in 1833, no name given, only the kid. His mother dies during childbirth. His father is neglectful. The kid grows up with no formal education, no religious instruction, no moral guidance. At age 14, he runs away from home. He will never return. He will never speak his father's name again. The year is 1847. The Mexican-American War has just ended. The Southwest is in chaos. Texas is barely American. Mexico barely controls its northern territories, and between them, a lawless frontier. The kid drifts from town to town. He works odd jobs, gets into fights, nearly perishes multiple times. In Nacogdoches, Texas, he meets a man named Toadvine. They fight in a saloon, burn down a hotel, become unlikely companions in chaos. In a tent revival, the kid encounters a massive, hairless man, 7 feet tall, perfectly bald, no eyebrows, no body hair, pale skin like marble. This is Judge Holden. The judge steps into the tent and accuses the preacher of terrible crimes against the vulnerable. His voice is calm, matter-of-fact, convincing. The crowd turns on the preacher instantly. They drag him from the tent. Violence erupts in the street. The preacher falls. Later that evening, at a saloon, the kid sees the judge again. He's sitting calmly, drinking. Someone approaches and asks if the preacher really committed those acts. The judge smiles, a strange, childlike smile on that massive, hairless face. I never laid eyes on the man before today. He'd fabricated the entire accusation, every word of it, for no apparent reason, just to observe what would happen, just to watch a man fall. The kid says nothing. He drinks. He leaves. But he will see the judge again. The kid continues drifting south, deeper into the borderlands. In a Mexican town, he's recruited into a filibustering expedition, a group of Americans hired as militia to fight in Mexico's internal conflicts. The expedition is a disaster from the start. They're ambushed within days. The group is scattered. Most perish in the desert. The kid wanders for days. No water, no food. The sun like a hammer, near death. He's captured by Mexican soldiers, thrown into a stone prison. The cell is dark, cramped, filled with other desperate men. By chance, Toadvine is there, the same man from Nacogdoches. They're cellmates now, both facing execution for entering Mexico illegally with weapons. And then an opportunity arrives, or what passes for opportunity in this world. John Joel Glanton rides into town, an ex-soldier, a hardened fighter, a man with a reputation that precedes him like a dark cloud. Glanton leads a gang of scalp hunters. They're contracted by the Mexican government to combat Apache raiders who've been attacking settlements. But Glanton's methods are indiscriminate. His gang targets anyone whose remains can be presented for bounty men, women, the elderly, the young, anyone whose physical evidence can pass for Apache and earn payment. Glanton is a psychopath, but he's also pragmatic. He needs men, bodies to fill his ranks, and in that Mexican prison, he finds them. Toadvine talks their way out. He's persuasive, convinces Glanton that he and the kid and another prisoner are experienced fighters, seasoned, dangerous. The governor releases them into Glanton's custody. Better to use these men than execute them. Better to point them at Mexico's problems. The kid joins the Glanton gang. There are about 40 men, Americans mostly, some Mexicans, some of uncertain origin, former soldiers, criminals, outcasts, degenerates, men with no other options, men who've chosen to have no other options, and riding beside Glanton, sitting tall on a huge horse, is the judge, Judge Holden, The same massive hairless man from the tent revival months before. He greets the kid with that same strange smile, as if he'd been expecting him, as if this meeting was inevitable. The gang rides to a nearby town. They acquire new weapons, new revolvers, 6-shooters, revolutionary technology for 1849. Samuel Colt's latest design. They can fire 6 shots without reloading. No one else in this region has weapons like these. The gang now possesses overwhelming firepower, and so their campaign begins. Their first action for bounty targets those who cannot defend themselves. An elderly woman, alone, isolated in the desert, far from any settlement. They approach her camp. She tries to flee. She cannot. They take what they need to collect the bounty. They leave her body for the desert. They ride back to the governor, present their evidence, collect their payment. The governor is pleased. He throws them a feast at his mansion. The townspeople celebrate them as heroes, protectors of civilization, defenders of the innocent. The gang drinks heavily. They trash the mansion, break furniture, terrorize servants, turn the celebration into chaos. They leave 3 days later with a price on their heads. What follows are months of systematic campaigns across the Southwest. The gang moves from settlement to settlement, from territory to territory. They encounter Apache camps, settlements of families. They attack without warning, without mercy. The violence is total and overwhelming. McCarthy describes these events with clinical precision, no emotion, no moral commentary from the narrator, no judgment. Just, this happened, then this, then this. The historical record rendered in biblical language, evidence of their actions hangs from their saddles as they ride to collect bounties. Dozens of items, some so small they clearly indicate the victims were very young. The smallest barely larger than a man's fist. The kid participates. He has to. To refuse would mean death at the hands of the gang. But McCarthy never tells us what he feels internally. We see only his actions, his silence, his continued presence. Throughout these campaigns, the judge takes extensive notes. He carries journals. He draws pictures of plants and animals, sketches, landscapes, measures rock formations with instruments, studies bones, records everything he sees. He draws with remarkable skill. His sketches are detailed, precise, almost scientific in their accuracy. Then he destroys them, burns his drawings methodically, smashes the bones he studied, scatters the fragments. When asked why, he says, "Whatever exists without my knowledge exists without my consent." He cannot tolerate anything existing that he hasn't first catalogued and understood. He must possess all knowledge. And once he's recorded something, the original becomes redundant, can cease to exist. At night, around campfires, the judge gives philosophical speeches, long sermons about the nature of existence, about war, about conflict, about power. He speaks eloquently, quotes classical philosophy, references books most of the gang have never heard of. His voice remains calm, almost gentle, like a teacher instructing students. He says, "War is the ultimate arbiter of all disputes. War has always existed and will always exist." He says, "Moral law is an invention, a tool created by the weak to constrain the strong." The men listen, some argue, some quote scripture back at him. The ex-priest Tobin especially challenges his statements, but they cannot refute him effectively, because everything they've done, everything they're doing, seems to prove his philosophy correct. The gang's fortune begins to turn. They get into a confrontation in one Mexican town. Several gang members are lost in the fighting. More are wounded. They barely escape, riding hard through the night, leaving the town burning behind them. Days later, they're ambushed by a Mexican army unit, a real military force, not raiders or militia. Professional soldiers. The fight is brutal. More gang members fall. More are wounded. The gang that seemed invincible is suddenly vulnerable. They have to move quickly. The wounded slow them down. They can't transport everyone, and staying means death for all of them. So they make a terrible choice. They end the suffering of their own wounded men Rather than leave them to a slower fate or capture, the kid is told to handle one of the wounded. A man named Shelby. The kid goes to where Shelby lies, raises his pistol, but he can't complete the task. He can't pull the trigger. He lets Shelby live, says nothing, just walks away. He falls behind the gang, separates from them for days. Alone in the desert, walking, dying of thirst, the kid encounters something inexplicable, a tree on fire, a burning tree in the middle of the wilderness, flames rising from its branches, but the tree itself doesn't consume, doesn't turn to ash, like Moses and the burning bush in Scripture, a sign, a vision, a test. McCarthy never explains this image. Is it real? A hallucination from dehydration? A spiritual sign from something beyond the material world? We don't know. The text refuses to clarify. The kid stares at it, then walks on. He catches up with the gang days later. They're exhausted, haggard, low on ammunition, low on water, low on hope. The once seemingly invincible group now looks like desperate survivors, their clothes torn, their faces gaunt, their horses dying. Around a campfire that night, a gang member named Tobin tells the kid a story. Tobin is an ex-priest. He left the church to join Glanton. He's killed men, done terrible things. But he still remembers Scripture, still sometimes prays. Tobin tells the kid how the judge joined them years ago, when the gang was much smaller. Maybe 15 men total. They were pursued by Apache warriors, a large group, well armed. The gang was out of gunpowder, completely out. They had guns but nothing to fire. They were about to be destroyed, certain death approaching. Then they found the judge, sitting at a crossroads in the desert. No horse visible, no water, no supplies. Just sitting on a rock, as if he'd been waiting for them, as if he knew they'd come. The judge stood, smiled, said, "Follow me." He led them to a mountain, showed them how to make gunpowder from basic materials, from their own bodily waste, from sulfur in the rocks, from charcoal from burned wood. He saved their lives, gave them the means to fight back. The Apaches attacked, and the gang destroyed them. The judge has been with them ever since. Glanton trusts him completely, consults him on every decision, treats him almost like a second-in-command, or a priest, or something else entirely. But Tobin wonders aloud to the kid, was salvation worth the cost? Is the judge their savior or their curse? Did he save them so they could live, or so they could serve his purposes? The kid asks, "What purposes?" Tobin shakes his head. "I don't know, but he has them. Be sure of that." Around the fire one night, the judge delivers his most famous sermon, his philosophical manifesto. The speech that reveals his worldview completely. Someone in the gang quotes the Bible. "He that lives by the sword shall perish by the sword." The judge responds, "What right man would have it any other way?" He's not arguing against the statement. He's embracing it completely, saying, yes, violence creates more violence. Death creates more death. And that's the natural order. That's beautiful. That's how it should be. The judge continues, his voice calm, educational, like a professor lecturing students. War was always here. Before man was, war waited for him, the ultimate trade awaiting its ultimate practitioner. That is the way it was and will be. That way, and not some other way. In the judge's philosophy, conflict isn't something humans invented. It's not a social construct. It's not a failure of diplomacy or understanding. It's fundamental to reality itself, built into the structure of existence, predating humanity, waiting for us to arrive so it could finally be practiced at its highest level. War is the truest form of divination. It is the testing of one's will and the will of another within that larger will, which, because it binds them, is therefore forced to select. War is the ultimate game, because war is at last a forcing of the unity of existence. Conflict isn't random in this philosophy. It's not chaos. It's how reality makes choices, how the universe decides what should survive and what should perish. Every dispute, every disagreement, every competition ultimately resolves through force. Everything else is just delay, just postponement of the inevitable test. War is God. This is the judge's central thesis. The core of his philosophy, conflict is the ultimate organizing principle, not love, not justice, not mercy, not reason. Conflict, war. The testing of wills through force, because conflict is the only force that requires everything else to submit to it, even morality, even religion, even human values and ideals. If you want your values to matter in the material world, the judge argues, you must enforce them through force, through the willingness to destroy what opposes them. Otherwise, they're merely abstract concepts with no power, no reality, just words in the air. The man who has not been tested in war, the judge says, the man who cannot bring himself to participate in this great game, such a man is not fully alive. He is a ghost, a shadow, nothing. The ex-priest Tobin sits listening to this speech, his face troubled. He's taken life, many times. He's abandoned his religious vows, traded the collar for a gun. He wants to argue, wants to refute the judge, but he can't, because his own actions seem to prove the judge's point. He's participated in everything the gang has done. He's covered in that same moral stain. And this is the judge's rhetorical genius. He doesn't need to convince anyone of his philosophy through pure argument. Their actions already embody it. They're already living proof of his thesis. The gang reaches the Colorado River. There's a ferry crossing here, run by a group of Yuma people. The crossing is essential. Whoever controls it controls access to California, controls the movement of people and goods. Glanton sees opportunity. He makes an agreement with the Yuma. They'll run the ferry together, split the profits. Everyone benefits. For weeks, it works. They charge exorbitant fees, extort travelers who have no other choice, make a fortune. Glanton's trunk fills with gold, silver, jewelry, teeth pulled from the mouths of travelers, thousands of dollars, more wealth than any of them have ever seen. But Glanton barely looks at it. He opens the trunk occasionally, stares at the contents, then closes it again. The money doesn't interest him anymore. The accumulation means nothing. He's moved beyond material concerns into something else, some other motivation that even he might not fully understand. Then Glanton betrays the Yuma, for no clear reason, no provocation. He simply attacks several of them one morning, takes their lives for no purpose except that he can. The Yuma have their revenge. They've been waiting, planning. They attack at dawn while most of the gang is still intoxicated from the night before. The fight is brief, brutal. Most of the Glanton gang perishes in minutes. Glanton himself falls, his skull crushed by a rock. The man who seemed unstoppable, destroyed in seconds. The kid, Toadvine, and Tobin barely escape. They flee into the desert, dying of thirst, wounded, being pursued by surviving Yuma warriors. They run for days. The desert is endless. The sun is merciless. They're dying slowly. They reach a well, just a small opening in the rocks, water barely visible at the bottom. The judge is there, without clothing. Sitting calmly beside the well, and beside him, is the young man with severe mental disabilities who'd joined the gang weeks before, also without clothing, sitting, staring at nothing. The young man follows the judge like a devoted animal, mindlessly obedient. He does whatever the judge commands without question or hesitation. The judge looks up as they approach, smiles. "Gentlemen," he says, "I've been expecting you." The kid has a pistol, one of the few weapons they managed to keep. He could end the judge right here. The judge is unarmed, vulnerable. The kid raises the pistol, points it at the judge's massive hairless head. The judge doesn't move, doesn't flinch, just sits there, smiling, waiting. The kid's finger is on the trigger, 1 ounce of pressure. That's all it would take. But he doesn't fire. He can't. Some restraint, some hesitation, some final moral boundary he cannot cross. He lowers the pistol, says nothing, turns away. Tobin and the kid take water from the well. They leave. Toadvine stays behind. He's too wounded, too exhausted. He can't continue. Tobin whispers to the kid as they leave, "You should have done it. Should have killed him when you had the chance." The kid says nothing. The judge pursues them, not immediately, but eventually, across miles of desert, through territories both known and unknown. The kid and Tobin hear him calling, the judge's voice carrying across the wasteland, that strange childlike voice from that massive frame. "Kid," he calls, "I know you're out there. I know what you are." They keep moving, don't respond, but the voice follows. "You alone were mutinous," the judge shouts. "You alone reserved in your soul some corner of clemency for the heathen." The judge is telling the kid what he's always known. The kid never fully submitted to the gang's philosophy, never fully embraced the violence as purpose. He held something back, some small moral hesitation, some tiny spark of restraint, and this drives the judge to pursue him relentlessly. Because the kid represents the one thing the judge cannot tolerate, resistance to his philosophy, proof that his worldview isn't universal, isn't inevitable. The man who believes that the secrets of the world are forever hidden lives in mystery and fear, the judge calls. Superstition will drag him down, the rain will fall upon him, and he will perish in loneliness and despair. The judge is telling the kid, "You think there's some higher meaning, some moral truth beyond raw power, but there isn't. It's illusion, fantasy, and your belief in that phantom will destroy you." Eventually, the kid and Tobin are found by a group of Native Americans, not hostile. They're saved, given water, given food, brought to safety. They make it to San Diego, a real town, civilization of a sort. Tobin goes to find medical help, says he'll return. The kid waits. Tobin never returns. The kid never sees him again. Another companion lost. Another thread severed. The kid is arrested by local authorities. Some charge related to his time with the gang. He's thrown in jail. While in the cell, the judge visits. He stands outside, looks in through the bars, that massive hairless face, those pale eyes. "Hello, kid," he says. The judge tells him he's disappointed, says the kid betrayed the gang, betrayed their purpose, by not fully committing to their philosophy, by holding back, by showing mercy. "You could have been great," the judge says. "You could have transcended your weak nature, but you chose otherwise. You chose to remain small." The kid says nothing, just stares. The judge smiles, turns, walks away, his footsteps echoing in the stone corridor. The next day, the kid is released. No explanation, no trial. Just, "You're free to go." While recovering from his wounds in a boarding house, the kid has a strange dream, a vivid dream. More real than reality, he dreams of a man making counterfeit coins, fake money. The man works carefully, precisely, creating forgeries that look real but have no actual value. The dream is cryptic, symbolic. McCarthy never explains its meaning, but the implication seems clear. The judge offers counterfeit values, false meanings, worthless coins that glitter like gold, a philosophy that seems powerful but leads only to destruction. We jump forward in time, a leap of decades. It's now 1878. The kid is no longer a kid. He's a man, middle-aged, 45 years old, scarred by his experiences. He works as a caravan guard, protecting travelers across the desert, the same desert where he once hunted. Now he protects. People sense he's been through terrible things. They respect him, fear him slightly. He rarely speaks, never tells stories about his past. One night he's camped in the wilderness, his fire small, alone. A few adolescent boys approach, teenagers, travelers. They ask if they can share his fire. The kid nods. They sit, they talk. Normal conversation. Then an argument breaks out over something trivial, something meaningless. The kid responds with lethal force. One of the boys falls, dead, just like that. After 28 years of relative peace, after working as a protector, the violence returns. The old patterns reassert themselves. The other boys flee, taking their dead companion's younger brother with them, creating another orphan, another victim, another link in the chain. The kid continues traveling, enters a saloon in a frontier town, Fort Griffin, Texas. A rough place, gets a drink, sits alone in the shadows, and across the room, through the layers of smoke, through the crowd, he sees the judge. The judge hasn't aged, not a single day, not a single change. It's been 28 years since the Yuma massacre. The kid is now middle-aged, gray in his hair, lines in his face, scars visible. The judge looks exactly the same massive frame, the same hairless head, the same pale eyes, the same childlike smile. Not a wrinkle, not a scar, not a single hair has appeared on that smooth skin. The kid stares, frozen. He thought the judge was dead, or gone, or just a memory. But here he is, real, unchanged, eternal. The judge approaches, sits beside the kid, orders drinks for both of them. They talk. The judge asks about the kid's life. The kid answers briefly, reluctantly. The judge talks about his own travels, about philosophy, about the state of the world. Then he leans close, says, "You've been waiting for me, haven't you?" The kid says nothing. You've been waiting all these years for this meeting, this final dance. The judge invites the kid to join him fully, to embrace what he calls the dance, his word for the eternal cycle of conflict and power that governs existence. It's not too late, the judge says. You can still choose, still become what you were meant to be. The kid refuses, says, "I ain't nothing like you." The judge smiles. "Aren't you? We'll see." The kid leaves the saloon, spends time with one of the establishment's workers, then stumbles outside into the dark street. There's commotion, shouting. Someone is missing. People are searching. The kid needs to relieve himself. Goes to the facilities behind the saloon, small wooden structures, outhouses. He opens one of the doors. The judge is waiting inside. Time passes. We don't know how much. Minutes, hours. Later, men discover something in that small room. They're screaming. Some are physically ill. Some are weeping. They've never witnessed anything like it. Never imagined such a thing possible. McCarthy doesn't describe what they found, doesn't show us. We never see it directly. We only witness their horrified reactions, their terror, their grief. The kid is dead. That much is certain. But how he died, what was done to him in those final moments, what the judge did to him, remains deliberately unclear. The final image of the book, the judge dancing in the saloon, back inside, as if nothing happened. The crowd loves him. He's playing fiddle, dancing, moving gracefully despite his massive size, smiling, laughing, people cheer. Buy him drinks, want to dance with him. He never sleeps, the judge. He is dancing, dancing. He says that he will never die. The judge has won. The kid is destroyed. The philosophy of violence triumphs, and the book ends. Before we discuss what Blood Meridian means philosophically, we must discuss how it's written, because McCarthy's prose style is itself a form of challenge to the reader. Blood Meridian contains no quotation marks whatsoever. When characters speak, there are no visual indicators in the text, no "he said" or "she replied," no dashes, no conventional punctuation to separate speech from description, just words, dialogue mixed seamlessly with narrative description. The reader must carefully parse who's speaking, must track conversations through context alone. This creates deliberate disorientation, confusion. You can't skim this book, you can't speed read, you must read every word with full attention, or you'll become lost. McCarthy also refuses to use apostrophes in contractions, not don't, but don't, not can't, but can't, not it's, but its, not we're, but were. This might seem like a minor stylistic choice, a quirk, but it creates a specific effect. The words look archaic, biblical, like Old Testament English translated into American vernacular. And that's completely deliberate, because McCarthy is writing a kind of scripture, an anti-Bible, a book where the divine seems absent and conflict becomes the only sacred principle. His sentences range dramatically in length, from 3 words to 300 words. Some are spare and direct. The kid spat. They rode on. Night came. Men died. Others sprawl across half a page, dense with imagery, packed with biblical cadence, describing landscapes as if they were living organisms with hostile intent, creating rhythm through repetition and variation. Spanish appears throughout the text without translation, without footnotes, without glossaries. McCarthy assumes you either know Spanish or you'll figure it out from context. He will not provide footnotes, will not hold your hand, will not make it easy. The vocabulary is deliberately archaic and obscure. McCarthy uses words most modern readers have never encountered, words that send you to the dictionary repeatedly, words like palfrey, paludal, sepulchral, vermiculate, rachitic, amphilud, terpsichore. You'll need a dictionary open beside you while reading. Frequently, this is intentional. When McCarthy describes historical violence, he does so with what critics call surgical precision. He doesn't say conflict occurred. He doesn't say fighting happened. He describes the specific historical details, the exact documented methods, the recorded aftermath, the evidence that survived. No emotion from the narrator, no moral judgment, no hand-wringing, no editorializing. Just historians recorded this, then this, then this. The facts rendered in biblical language. This clinical approach makes the violence more disturbing, not less. Because there's no cushion, no narrative filter, no way to distance yourself from what's being described. When McCarthy describes the natural world, he makes it seem conscious, hostile, almost demonic. A tornado becomes some drunken djinn. Mountains become the backs of sea beasts in a tide pool. The sun is described as urine-colored. Rain becomes vertical curtains of lead. Nature isn't neutral in this book. It's not peaceful. It's not the romanticized wilderness of Thoreau or Emerson. It's portrayed as actively hostile, as if the world itself is designed to destroy humanity, as if creation is a form of violence. And throughout the text, biblical and Gnostic imagery appears constantly. The burning tree, the pilgrims, the ex-priest, the judge as a possible archon or demon, war as a kind of false god. McCarthy is deliberately building mythology, American mythology, a creation story for a nation whose westward expansion involved tremendous violence. He's asking, what if America's origin story isn't about freedom and democracy? What if it's about systematic destruction? What would an honest scripture of American expansion look like? This style is deliberately difficult, aggressively difficult. Many readers give up in the first 50 pages. The prose is too dense, too unforgiving, too exhausting to parse. Some people throw the book across the room, literally. They can't take it. But those who persist discover something important. The difficulty serves a purpose. The challenge is the point. Blood Meridian doesn't want to be comfortable to read. It wants to challenge you, force you to work for understanding, make you earn every insight. Because if reading about historical violence is easy and comfortable, if it slides down smoothly, you're not truly confronting what happened. You're consuming it as entertainment. McCarthy strips away literary comfort, removes the usual moral guideposts, takes away the narrative cushions we expect. He leaves you alone in the conceptual desert with the judge, with these questions, with this darkness, and that's where the real philosophy begins. Judge Holden is one of the most disturbing characters in American literature. 7 feet tall, completely hairless, pale skin, light eyes, a voice that sounds almost childlike despite his massive frame. He speaks multiple languages, quotes philosophy, plays fiddle, dances gracefully, draws intricate sketches, studies geology and warfare, and he participates in terrible acts without hesitation or remorse. The real Judge Holden existed. He's mentioned in historical accounts of the Glanton gang, described as unusually large, intelligent, and completely hairless. But McCarthy transforms him into something more, something mythological. perhaps something not quite human. The judge's true power isn't physical, it's intellectual, rhetorical, philosophical. His speeches around the campfire are the philosophical heart of Blood Meridian. Someone in the gang quotes the Bible, "He that lives by the sword shall perish by the sword." The judge responds, "What right man would have it any other way?" He's embracing it, saying, "Yes, violence creates violence, and that's how it should be." The judge continues, "War was always here. Before man was, war waited for him, the ultimate trade awaiting its ultimate practitioner." War isn't something humans invented. It's fundamental to reality itself, predating humanity, waiting for us. War is the truest form of divination. It is the testing of one's will and the will of another within that larger will, which, because it binds them, is therefore forced to select. War isn't random. It's how reality makes choices, how the universe decides what survives and what perishes. War is at last a forcing of the unity of existence. War is God. This is the judge's central thesis. Conflict is the ultimate organizing principle, not love, not justice, not mercy, conflict. Because conflict is the only force that requires everything else to submit to it. If you want your values to matter, you must enforce them through force. Otherwise, they're meaningless. The ex-priest Tobin sits listening. He's taken lives. He's abandoned his faith. He can't refute the judge because his own actions prove the judge's point. And this is the judge's genius. He doesn't need to convince anyone. Their actions already embody his philosophy. The judge has another obsession. He must witness everything, record everything, know everything. He draws plants, animals, rocks, artifacts, studies them meticulously, then destroys his drawings, burns them deliberately. Why? Whatever exists without my knowledge exists without my consent. The judge cannot tolerate anything existing that he hasn't first cataloged. He must possess all knowledge. Once he's recorded something, the original can cease to exist. This is the ultimate will to power, not just physical domination, but epistemological domination, owning reality itself. When the judge pursues the kid through the desert, he's not just trying to eliminate him, he's trying to convert him. "You alone were mutinous," the judge says. "You alone reserved in your soul some corner of clemency." The kid never fully submitted to the gang's philosophy. He held something back, some small moral hesitation, and this drives the judge to pursue him relentlessly. When the kid encounters the judge again in 1878, 28 years have passed. The kid has aged, weathered, scarred. The judge looks exactly the same, not a wrinkle, not a scar, not a single hair has appeared. Has he not aged? Or is he something that was never alive to begin with? The final image. He never sleeps, the judge. He is dancing, dancing. He says that he will never die. This is not simply a man. This is a principle made flesh, an archetype, the embodiment of a philosophy. So what is the judge? Some say he's the devil. Some say he's a Gnostic archon, a malevolent spiritual being that rules the material world. Some say he's death personified. Some say he's the American ID made flesh. Some insist he's simply a very intelligent, very evil human. McCarthy never tells us. He leaves it deliberately ambiguous. But here's what we know. The judge represents the philosophy that violence is ultimate, that war is God, that morality is weakness. And at the end of the book, the judge is still dancing, still alive, still winning.